Welcome, dreamers, to the realm where time whispers in dust and stone. Tonight, we drift beyond the veil of recorded history, into the twilight mists of a world half remembered and half lost. A time before the pharaohs, before pyramids pierced the sky, before the Nile knew kings. It is there, in that forgotten murmur of time, that a shadow stirs, a name almost erased. A ruler crowned not with gold, but with mystery. Scorpion King, a figure buried beneath the desert's silence, carved only in broken ivory and symbols too ancient for clear translation. Was he man, myth, or something in between? A whisper from the womb of a civilization just being born. Let us walk the sands of Predynastic Egypt, where civilization's breath was still new and the gods had not yet chosen their thrones. Let us listen for the footfalls of Scorpion, the lost sovereign, whose rule carved the path toward dynasties yet to rise. But before we embark on this journey through time's mysteries, if these ancient whispers resonate with your soul, let your presence be known through a gentle light, and join our circle of dreamers by subscribing to continue these nightly journeys into history's hidden realms. Share with us, fellow dreamers, from which corner of the world you're joining tonight's contemplation. Let the global community of history's mysteries connect across time zones as we drift together into the past. Now, close your eyes. Let the Nile cradle you. Let the moon rise over the sand, and listen, for the Scorpion King calls from beneath the silence. Long before the great pyramids stood like sentinels beneath the desert sun, before obelisks cast their long shadows over temples carved in stone, there was the river, eternal, unchanging, flowing like a silver thread through the dreaming heart of the land. The Nile, she was not merely a river then, a goddess, a breathing, sighing force of life. Her waters carried not only silt and grain, but memory, the murmur of beginnings. There were no cities yet, only clusters of reed huts beside the floodplains, only wandering footsteps in the mud that would dry to dust by morning. The people knew no kings, only the rhythm of the floods, the curve of the crescent moon reflected in the stillness of the water, and the cries of birds calling across the wide blue hush of the sky. They painted their dreams on pottery. They carved the sun and the river into bone and ivory. They told stories by the fire of creatures who lived in the stars and men who could speak with spirits. But deep in the southern lands, where the Nile winds narrow and swift, where cliffs press close and the desert leans in to listen, a new sound began to stir. The sound of footsteps heavier than hunters, the sound of stone tools shaping, not bone, but destiny. The sound of a people learning to follow, a leader, not just a strong man, not just a war chief, but something new, something crowned, not by gold, but by it. And though his name was not yet spoken by all, though the scribes had not yet invented the signs to spell him, his presence spread like smoke across the hills. Later they would call him Scorpion. But in those early days, he was only a shadow beneath a rising sun, a figure cloaked in silence, moving through time's first breath. Who was he? This one they followed. Where did he come from? What power did he hold to draw others, not by whip or fear, but by something older? A vision, the vision of a kingdom not yet born, of temples not yet built, of laws not yet carved. Here, in the hush of the Predynastic dawn, we will follow the whisper of that shadow. We will walk the river before time knew its name, and we will listen for the footsteps of the Scorpion King, for he is waiting. Just beyond the next bend of the Nile, the wind moves gently over the desert floor, its breath soft as the memory of a dream. Grains of sand shift, uncovering secrets the earth has hidden for millennia. And among those grains are symbols, not words, not yet, but marks, incisions, lines and curves carved into ivory tags, pottery shards, and fragments of slate. Some show animals, a scorpion, a falcon, a fish. Others resemble rivers, nets, or the arc of the sun. They are not yet writing, but they are more than ornament. They are the birth of meaning, the beginning of names. It is here, among these marks, that we first find him, the Scorpion, etched upon a ceremonial mace at its handle, long lost to time, its meaning drifting like smoke. A figure stands tall, crowned, robed in authority. Before him rows of people kneel or march as if bringing offerings, or tribute or surrender. Above him hovers the shape, a scorpion, not as a threat, but as a sign, a standard, an identity. Was it a name, was it a title, or was it something deeper still? In ancient Egypt, names were not merely labels. They were power. To name something was to define it, to call it forth into being, and to wear the name of a creature, especially one as silent, venomous, and eternal as the scorpion, was to embrace a mystery. The scorpion was both feared and revered. A guardian of tombs, a symbol of desert strength, a creature of night. Was this ruler fierce, like the creature he bore as his emblem, or was he a protector, unseen but ever present? No one alive can say for certain, but the symbols speak in their ancient, quiet way. They tell us someone rose, someone powerful enough to be remembered, yet distant enough to be forgotten. His name was never written in full. His voice is lost, but his mark remains in symbols carved into stone, in fragments left buried beneath the silt, in whispers caught in the wind. He is the mystery at the edge of language, the threshold between and history, between silence and speech. And we are still listening, still tracing his name in the sand, still wondering what it meant to those who first followed him, still dreaming of the one they called Scorpion, high above the river's fertile edge, where the cliffs of limestone rise like petrified waves. The land stretches dry and dreaming. This is Upper Egypt, not higher in direction, but in elevation and in mystery. Here, the Nile, its flow is faster, its voice more urgent. It cuts through valleys flanked by stone and silence. This is not the Egypt of golden tombs and glittering palaces. This is older, harsher, sacred in a more primal way. The land is arid but not empty. Along its shores, the early people of their settlements clung to the river's edge, where life could still take root. They shaped clay into vessels, painted with swirls and spirals, symbols of water, wind, and flame. They buried their dead with care, in shallow graves, curled like unborn children, with offerings placed beside them, ivory combs, flint knives, beads of shell and stone, not just practical things, but objects of meaning, tokens of memory, promises to the next world. They lived with the desert pressing in on all sides, and the sky stretching wide above them, a sky they watched with reverence. As the stars wheeled and whispered, in this land, time felt different, less like a line, more like a circle. Seasons rose and fell with the floods. Life grew, withered, and returned. Nothing was ever truly gone, only transformed, and it is here, in this ancient breath of the earth, that the Scorpion King would rise, not from a palace but from the dust, not with gold, but with vision. He was shaped by this land, its austerity, its clarity, its silence. He was not the only leader in Upper Egypt. There were other strongmen, warlords, clan heads, but Scorpion, he was something more. He did not merely rule a village, he united them. He did not follow the river's rhythm, he rewrote it, and the people followed, not just because of strength but because of stillness, the kind of stillness that comes from listening to the river, to the winds, to the ancestors, and to something else, something older, something divine. For in Upper Egypt, every hill was a sentinel, every stone carried memory, and every ruler walked with the gods, or tried to. Scorpion, it seems, walked quietly, but each step left a trace, and those traces still sleep beneath the sands of Upper Egypt, waiting to be remembered, waiting to be dreamt. In the dawn light of a land just learning to speak, there came one who did not raise his voice but gathered power all the same. He did not conquer with noise, nor announce his name with thunder. He moved like the shadow of a tree across sand, slow, certain, and impossible to hold. The Scorpion King. No chroniclers recorded his speeches, no papyrus scrolls preserve his decrees, yet his presence is felt, etched in fragments, woven into the very soil of Egypt's becoming. They say he was a unifier, not through decree, not through brute command, but through something more elusive, a vision shared in silence. Before Egypt became one, it was many. Villages, clans, small kingdoms, each with its own customs, its own totems, its own gods. But rivers do not recognize borders, and neither did he. From the cliffs of Hierakonpolis to the floodplains of Nakata, the signs of centralization begin to appear: standardized pottery, shared burial practices, tools shaped from a single idea. And behind it all, the Scorpion. Somewhere, somehow, this one figure wove a net of understanding through the fragmented lands. Was it diplomacy, ritual? Was it the quiet authority of a man who spoke through symbol alone? No one knows. That is his power and his poetry. He unified not through domination, but through resonance. He echoed the river's flow. He mirrored the stars' slow wheel. He bound the people of Upper Egypt not just by rule, but by rhythm. The rhythm of something greater than them all. The rhythm of a kingdom forming, not through violence, but through vision. There is no record of a war, only a deepening silence, the kind that comes after agreement, the kind that whispers, yes, we are one. And so, without bloodshed loud enough to echo through time, without monuments high enough to scrape the sky, Scorpion became what Egypt needed: a path forward, a bridge, a beginning. In the hush before the dynasties, he stood as the silent unifier. They always do. In the halls of a museum, far from the heat of the Nile, beneath glass and gentle light, rests a fragment of power, a relic of ceremony, a whisper carved in stone. It is called the Scorpion myth. Oval in shape, smooth at its edges, its surface tells a story, though the language is older than words. Here, the Scorpion King appears, tall and composed, wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt. He holds a hoe or a staff, reaching toward furrowed earth. Behind him, attendants carry vessels. Before him, water flows. Symbols rise like reeds from the marsh. It is not a weapon for war. It is a symbol of dominion, of cultivation, of sacred order, and above his head his name, or rather, his sin, a scorpion, carefully carved, unmistakable. It is not placed by accident. This creature, silent and still, embodies more than sting or stealth. It holds within its form the shape of the desert, the patience of the eternal, the danger of the unseen. Was this image a record of conquest, a ritual, a declaration of kingship, or was it something softer, a prayer, a vision rendered in stone? No one knows for sure, but the mace head speaks in the way that only ancient things can. It is not loud, it does not shout, it hums, gently. It hums of a world where kings were not yet gods, but men walking beside the divine, tracing symbols in mud and starlight. It hums of the first steps toward unity, of rivers shaped by will, of land turned sacred through touch. And it reminds us that memory does not live in sound alone. It lives in form, in gesture, in stone worn by centuries of silence. The scorpion, though small and broken, holds an entire world within it, a world of beginnings, a world still dreaming its name. And as you gaze upon it, whether in a quiet museum corridor or within your own imagination, you are gazing into the eyes of the earliest Egypt, into the eyes of a king made of dust and myth, into the memory of Scorpion. Beneath the breath of the southern wind, along the slow bend of the Nile, there lies a place where stone once rose and falcons circled high above Nicain, the city of falcons. Its name echoes softly now, but in the time of Scorpion it was a heartbeat of power, a sacred place, woven from mud brick and memory, where priests walked barefoot through the sand and offerings shimmered in temple light. Here the falcon god Horus would one day rise, guardian of kings, watcher of truth. But even before the falcon had a name, Nicain looked to the sky and dreamed of flight. Archaeologists have brushed the earth gently, unveiling rows of pottery, ivory wands etched with animals, and the remains of temples older than the pyramids. Temples built not to conquer the heavens, but to honor them. It was in this city, this gathering of sacred and soil, that Scorpion's presence lingers. Was this his capital, his sanctuary, his cradle? Perhaps all three. For Nicain was more than a city. It was a threshold, a place where earth touched eternity. The people here were artisans and dreamers. They carved the first standards-long poles topped with images of animals and signs, symbols that would one day become the emblems of gnomes. The provinces of a united Egypt, they painted jackals, ostriches, boats. They crafted flint knives so fine their edges gleamed like moonlight. They buried their leaders with reverence, beneath mounds wrapped in ritual. In one such tomb, a ceremonial scepter was found, bearing the sign of a scorpion. Was it his? Was this the place where he watched the stars and listened to the river's song? Did he kneel before the early gods? Not in fear, but in quiet partnership, we cannot say. But Nicain whispers his name, softly, persistently, for it was here that kingship took root, not as a title of force, but as a sacred trust, a bridge between people and the divine. And if Scorpion walked its streets, his footprints are long since gone, yet still the falcons remember. Their shadows glide over the desert floor, as they did thousands of years ago, silent, enduring, watching. The city of falcons does not speak, it does not shout, it simply waits and dreams. In the deep desert near Abydos, where the winds speak only in sighs, a tomb rests beneath the sand, unmarked, silent, its stones warmed by the sun of 7,000 years. They call it a designation from archaeology, not a name, not a story. But perhaps once it was a throne, a cradle, a resting place of a ruler whose memory survived only in fragments. Within its walls, they found hundreds of ceramic jars, imported from the lands beyond the Nile, from the Levant, from lands older still. Inside them the residue of wine, mixed with resin and herbs, a drink not of war, but of ceremony. Scattered among the jars lay ivory tags, each etched with symbols, rudimentary marks of ownership, tribute, perhaps command. Some bear the sign of the scorpion. They were pierced with holes, meant to be tied to goods, like labels of a kingdom just learning to count. Here, we find not battle relics, but ledgers of an early administration. A man had lived here, a man who ruled a trade, who orchestrated offerings, who may have been the first to envision what it meant to organize a realm. His body is gone, dissolved by time, swallowed by sand, but the shape of his tomb remains deep, deliberate, with chambers carved to hold not just flesh, but meaning. Was this the tomb of Scorpion? We cannot say. The past offers only riddles, never answers. But here, in Tomb Uj, lies the echo of a figure powerful enough to bend the Nile's rhythm toward unity. A ruler who saw beyond his village, beyond his time, who shaped the earliest symbols into instruments of order. This tomb is not adorned with gold, no jeweled masks, no painted ceilings, only clay, only silence, only symbols scratched. Simple, sacred. It is not the tomb of a god. It is the tomb of a whisper, a threshold between forgetting and remembering. Scorpion's true burial place may never be known, but perhaps he does not lie in one place at all. Perhaps his tomb is the Nile itself, its waters washing over the bones of time. Perhaps he rests in every forgotten symbol, every cracked shard, every grain of desert sand that remembers how kings once dreamed. A tomb without a name, but not without a soul. For memory does not always need a monument. Sometimes it only needs silence. Long before the golden thrones of Memphis, before the step pyramids rose above Saqqara, before the names of Menes and Nama were etched in stone, there was a different world, a quieter one, a world before the pharaohs. It was a world not ruled by law, but by rhythm, the rhythm of seasons, the rhythm of floods, the rhythm of sun and shadow. In this age, power was not displayed through towering monuments, but through gestures, through rituals, through presence. The rulers were not called pharaohs, they were chieftains, priests, visionaries, intermediaries between the living and the unseen. They governed not from palaces, but from sacred centers, often ephemeral as wind-blown tents, or modest enclosures of clay and red. And yet, in these early days, something new was stirring, a sense that power could be inherited, that a single figure could embody the will of many, that a divine thread could bind the land together. Scorpion walked within this moment, not yet called divine, not yet immortalized, but already echoing the qualities that would later define kingship in Egypt. He appears not in triumph, but in transition. He is the bridge between what was and what could be. Before the pharaohs wore false beards and raised obelisks to the sky, Scorpion stood beneath the open heavens, crowned only with the white crown of Upper Egypt, his authority drawn from silence, his legacy shaped by mystery. What did he see? In the turning of the stars, in the murmurs of the priests, in the faces of those who gathered at his feet. Did he imagine a kingdom of stone? Did he hear the call of eternity? Or was he simply a man, walking beside the Nile, feeling the pull of destiny without knowing its name? Before the pharaohs, there were men who dreamed them into being. Men like Scorpion, half shadow, half scribe of the future. He may not have worn the title, but in the long hush before history speaks aloud, he whispered its first syllables. He made space for kings to follow. He carved the path, not with sword, but with vision. And the world followed, not in fear, but in wonder, in the twilight between myth and memory, where timelines blur and names become echoes. Another figure begins to rise. He comes after Scorpion. Nama, a name chiseled more clearly in the Stone of Kings, a name that marks the traditional beginning of dynastic. Egypt, a name crowned in duality, uniter of the two lands, but in Nama's shadow. There lingers a whisper, a presence just beyond the clarity of the record. The presence of Scorpion, the Nama palette, an artifact of conquest and ritual, shows a king wielding might, wearing both the white crown of Upper Egypt and the red crown of Lower Egypt. One figure, ruling two realms. But was Nama the first? Or was he the culmination of a path begun long before by another, by Scorpion? Some scholars suggest a sequence, that Scorpion reigned shortly before Nama, paving the way for full unification. That Scorpion led Upper Egypt, and his campaign softened the boundary with Lower Egypt, making Nama's conquest possible. Others wonder if the lines blur more deeply. Were they rivals, brothers? Two faces of a single transformation. The artifacts do not argue. They remain silent, as ancient things so often do. But the timing, the echoes, the overlapping symbols, they suggest a continuity, as if Scorpion dreamed the dream, and Nama brought it to form. One whispered, the other declared. One planted, the other harvested. Without Scorpion could Nama have reigned. Without the silent unifier, could the two lands have been joined? History honors Narma, for his symbols are clear, his images bolder, his palette more complete. But beneath Nama's voice, you can still hear Scorpion's breath, soft, steady, enduring. It is the sound of foundation, of work done quietly, of doors opened in the dark so that others may walk in light. And so the whisper continues, through stone, through sand, through time, Scorpion, still speaking, not to be heard, but to be remembered. In the stillness of early Egypt, before the golden diadems, before the lapis inlays and elaborate regalia, there existed two sacred forms, simple in shape, but vast in meaning. The crowns, white, red, two symbols, two lands, two identities, separate and yearning for union. The white crown, tall and conical, was the crown of Upper Egypt, the south, the land of cliffs, deserts, and swift waters, of Nekine, of Abydos, of Scorpion. The red crown, low and flared at the back, belonged to Lower Egypt, the north, the delta, the marshes, the slow-spreading fingers of the Nile. Each crown was more than a royal ornament. It was a promise, a vessel of sacred geography, to where one was to carry the soul of a land, to where both was to bridge the ancient divide. We do not know if Scorpion ever wore the red crown, but the white. On the Scorpion mace head, he appears beneath it, standing tall, tool in hand, commanding the landscape itself. That image matters. It tells us the crown was not simply for ceremony. It was power made visible, but it was also something more, something divine. In time, the crowns would be merged, combined into the Pishant, the double crown. The Sekhinti, but in Scorpion's day, they remained apart. One ruler, one crown, one realm, half of a whole. Yet even in their separation, the dream of unity stirred. The very existence of these crowns implies knowledge of the other, upper and lower, mirror and echo, to where one was to aspire toward both. And perhaps Scorpion, in his quiet wisdom, felt that weight upon his brow, not as a burden, but as a calling to bring the lands into harmony, not through conquest but through sacred weaving. The crowns were not trophies, they were thresholds, each a doorway to a different Egypt, and the one who dared wear them was not simply a king, but a bridge between earth and heaven, between past and future, between silence and speech. In the hush of the early kingdom, as winds stirred the reed beds, and the river ran silver beneath the moon, the sacred crowns waited for those who would listen. And Scorpion, in his quiet, watchful way, listened. He wore the white crown not with triumph, but with understanding, that to rule was to carry both burden and blessing, both silence and song. In the hush of the Predynastic dawn, before the ink flowed freely, before papyrus was etched with royal decrees and divine hymns, there were hands, steady, reverent hands, carving symbols into bone, into ivory, into clay. The first scribes, they were not yet called by that name, for writing had not fully awakened, but they were already listening to the world, to the gods, to the silence between breath and time. Their tools were simple: flint blades, fine-tipped points of copper, stones smooth enough to shape and scrape. Their medium was the world itself, broken potsherds, ceremonial palettes, the walls of early tombs, and from these tools they drew forth meaning. A line might be a river, a circle, the sun, a curved stroke, a horned beast. And somewhere among these early glyphs, a scorpion, drawn not in haste, but with care, revered, not feared. These protoscribes inscribed more than images. They recorded memory, not yet phonetic, not yet language as we know it, but intention, the first attempt to bind the ephemeral to the eternal, to catch a moment and preserve it in silence. And in doing so, they became bridges between past and present, between vision and permanence. What did they know of Scorpion? Were they his recorders, his dreamers, his priests? Did they sit in the flicker of oil lamps, etching his emblem into ivory, imagining a world where rulers would one day speak to generations unborn? Did they understand that their marks would outlast the voices of kings? It is through their hands that we glimpse Scorpion, not in voice, not in flesh, but in symbol. A carved tag tied to a jar, a stylized creature above a figure in a crown, a presence half seen yet wholly felt. These early scribes did not write in sentences. They wrote in essence, and in so doing, they began the greatest spell of all, a spell that would one day give birth to hieroglyphs, to scrolls, to the Book of the Dead. First, a scorpion carved in ivory. Still, silent, enduring. Thanks to them, he is not lost, only sleeping, only waiting to be read again. Before Osiris ruled the underworld, before Isis wept for the broken pieces of her beloved, before Horus spread his wings across temple walls, there were other gods, older gods, wilder, more primal, like the Nile itself, shifting, vast, and unbound. The early peoples of the Nile did not carve their deities in perfect human form. They saw divinity in the world around them, in the crocodile's stillness, in the falcon's flight, in the heat that shimmered off stone. Their gods had no single name, no strict myth. They were presence, force, whisper. At the edge of this pantheon, or perhaps at its heart, moved Scorpion, not a god himself, but a man walking among gods, listening to their breath in the reeds, hearing their footsteps in the storm. We do not know which deities he worshipped, but we know he lived at a time when the divine was near, when temples were not yet stone, but sacred circles of earth, when offerings were not gold, but water, blood, grain. In this early cosmos, the world was not fixed. The boundaries between human and divine were porous. A king could be a servant, a priest could be a scribe, a god could be a breeze passing through a fig tree at dusk, and perhaps a scorpion could be both protector and omen. Later, Sekhet would rise, goddess of healing and of stings, guardian of the dead. But in the time of Scorpion, the creature itself held the power. Silent, nocturnal, it lived beneath the earth, emerging in darkness, sting held high. To wear its image was to invoke both fear and reverence. To carry its mark was to court danger, and to embody wisdom. Scorpion may have prayed beneath stars whose names are long forgotten. He may have whispered to river spirits, or offered smoke to the rising sun. But always, he walked with the gods, not above, not below, but beside. In the earliest age, the gods were not distant, they were near, in the heat, in the wind, in the still gaze of a desert creature, and as Scorpion ruled, he did so with their breath at his neck, their rhythm in his veins. He did not proclaim himself divine. He did not need to, for in those sacred days, to rule well was divinity enough. To live in harmony with the gods, to shape the land with intention, to listen, that was worship. And Scorpion, in his silence, was a master listener. In the shimmer of predynastic light, when the throne had not yet found its shape, and the scepter had not yet taken form, there were still tools, simple, sacred, imbued with quiet power. For even before the age of gold and granite, a king required symbols not for glory, but for meaning. The Scorpion King, as seen upon his ceremonial maze head, does not wield a sword. He holds instead a hoe, its curve unmistakable, drawn not in haste, but with reverence. A hoe, the tool of cultivation, of reshaping earth. It is a subtle choice, and a profound one. This is no image of war. It is the image of order, of harmony, of sacred stewardship. To break the ground was not merely to farm. It was to initiate cosmic renewal, to reassert balance, to remind the world that man and soil must speak. This tool, simple in design, spoke louder than weapons. It declared the king as one who tames the chaos, who ensures that flood gives way to field, that death yields once more to life. Later, Egyptian kings would carry crooks and flails, shepherds, staff, and threshers' rods, symbols of rule and punishment, guidance and command. But Scorpion's time was different. His instruments were drawn from daily life, from the pulse of the land itself. They were not meant to impress, but to embody. To hold the hoe was to declare oneself as servant of the land, interpreter of divine rhythm, guardian of the cycle. Alongside this, we find other early objects: ivory tags, carved combs, ceremonial palettes, each one suggesting ritual, order, identity, and each, in its own way, belonged to kingship. Not in splendor, but an intention, for kingship in these early days was not about dominance, it was about balance. To rule was to tend, to guide, to listen, and the tools reflected that. They were not gilded, they were not exaggerated, they were functional and sacred. Scorpion understood this. He chose his symbols with care, he wore them with silence, and through them, he shaped a vision of kingship that would echo through the sands for millennia. A vision not of might, but of harmony, not of thunder, but of rhythm. And in that rhythm, he became king. Across the long breadth of the Nile, where papyrus sways and herons glide, a dream was slowly stirring, not of conquest, but of coherence. The Talan Supper in Low Egypt had long existed as reflections, not enemies, but estranged kin. They shared the river, but not yet the rhythm. They shared the sun, but not yet a crown. And in this space between mirrors, a path began to form, a path of unification. It was not paved with war, at least not in the way later chronicles would proclaim. There were battles, perhaps, but they are lost to time like footprints washed away by flood. What remains are hints, signs in the silt, symbols on stone. We see them in the standards carried by early rulers, emblems of nomes, each one a sacred district, a voice in the growing chorus. We see them in the rise of shared rituals, in burial practices echoing from Upper Egypt into the Delta, in the shapes of jars, the etchings on bone. And we see them in Scorpion. He does not appear as a conqueror. He appears as a weaver of place, of purpose, of symbol. His mace had made depict a ceremonial act, clearing the canal, offering tribute, or initiating sacred order. But what lies beneath the image is an understanding that to unify is to listen deeply, to know the lands not as trophies, but as living beings, to respect the delta's waters as much as the cliffs of the south, to bring not just rule, but resonance. Unification was not simply political. It was sacred. The two lands were seen as aspects of a divine whole, a duality to be honored, not erased. And the one who walked this path needed more than power. He needed presence. Scorpion had this not in monument, but in meaning. He carried the signs. He walked the river. He dreamed of one Egypt before the rest dared speak its name. And so, step by step, the path was laid. Through trade, through ritual, through silence, it would be others who declared the unification, who wore both crowns and carved their names in lasting stone. But the path, it was Scorpion's, laid quietly, firmly, endlessly, like the Nile itself. In the quiet centuries before hieroglyphs found their grammar, before gods bore names and kings wrote in divine script, there was a language already alive, the language of animals. This was not metaphor, it was memory. It was symbol and truth, woven into one. To the early peoples of the Nile, animals were not lesser beings. They were messengers, guardians, reflections of divine order. They watched the world in silence and carried the meanings men could barely speak. The scorpion, of course, was chief among these, not because it was feared, though its sting held danger, but because it moved unseen. It walked in shadow. It knew the earth's pulse. To bear the scorpion's image was not to terrify. It was to claim a certain wisdom, a closeness to mystery. Scorpion, the ruler, chose this creature not for vanity, but for message. He did not crown himself with lions or bulls. He wore the deserts. Hush, he bore the sting of quiet power. Other animals whispered their meanings too. The falcon's sharp-eyed and skybound would one day rise as Horus, protector of pharaohs. But in Scorpion's time, it was already sacred, a symbol of far-seeing rule, a king in flight. The snake coiled and eternal was the cycle of time. The Jacokian alert watched the border between life and death. Even the hippopotamus, so massive and hidden, held duality, mother and menace, guardian and destroyer. Each creature told a story, and the early kings, they listened. Their standards bore these animals, not as decoration, but as declaration. The clan of the falcon, the house of the scorpion, the followers of the fish. These were not just symbols, they were identities, lineages, mystical truths. A ruler in this age had to speak this language not aloud, but in symbol, in silence. And Scorpion, he was fluent. He carved his emblem not beside his face, but above it. Not as a label, but as essence. He allowed the animal to speak for him, to embody his rule, to carry him into memory. The language of animals would echo for millennia. In hieroglyphs, in temples, in the myths of gods and kings. But in the beginning, it was Scorpion who listened first, who let the creatures speak, who ruled in their image, and who passed, not with a roar, but with the whisper of wings, the sting of dusk, the echo of paws across sacred sand. The Nile does not speak in words. It murmurs, sings, sighs, a ceaseless lullaby woven into the soul of Egypt. It does not shout, it does not rush, it flows, like time, like breath. To those who lived by its banks in Scorpion's day, the river was more than water. It was a memory keeper, a teacher, a whispering god. Its floods marked the rhythm of life, the inundation bringing silt, fertility, renewal, its retreat revealing land, the promise of harvest, the return of dry footing. And within this cycle, the Nile carried voices, not spoken ones, but echoes of movement, of migration, of dreams exchanged between shores. Boats of reed skimmed our surface, quiet as insects carrying goods, prayers, stories. The Nile linked village to village, shrine to shrine. It was the first road, the first thread, binding Upper and Lower Egypt long before kings dared dream of unity. In this flowing cradle, Scorpion grew. He watched the reeds sway in windless silence. He learned the song of the flood. He knew the warning colors of the sky, the bird calls that foretold change. Perhaps he walked her banks in solitude, listening not for messages of power, but for balance. For in the Nile's voice, there is always a lesson. Too little flood and famine, too much and ruin. Only the quiet middle path brings life. And so, perhaps, Scorpion ruled as the river flowed, measured, watchful, never in haste. He may have sent emissaries by boat, their cargo not only jars of grain or oil, but ideas, signs, symbols, a vision of oneness, delivered on the river's breath. We will never know the details, but the evidence remains. Shared pottery styles, common burial forms, standards spreading down river like seeds. These are not the signs of conquest. They are the footprints of connection. And the Nile, she remembers, not in monuments, but in her curves, her songs, her patient turning. If you listen at dusk, as the sun kisses the palms and herons glide silently overhead, you may hear it, a voice too old for language, a name carried not on lips, but on ripples. Scorpion still drifting, still dreaming, still flowing in the river's soul. When the desert cooled at dusk, and the sky unfurled its velvet tapestry, the people of early Egypt turned their gaze upward. There, above the hush of the earth, the stars shimmered in ancient constellations. Silent fires in the firmament, guiding, watching, listening. Before temples carved from limestone, before obelisks reached toward heaven, there were open spaces, sacred clearings, stone circles, humble altars of sand and offering. And in these sanctuaries beneath the sky, ceremonies bloomed. The air would be warm, tinged with incense made from desert resin, fragrant and slow-burning. Chants low, rhythmic breath like crows like smoke into the night. This was not religion as we now know it. This was communion, a dialogue between earth and sky, between breath and eternity. In such ceremonies, the king was not above the people, but among them, a conduit, a vessel. Scorpion would have stood beneath these stars, robed in linen, crowned with the white crown, his shadow long across the sand. Perhaps he held ritual tools, a hoe for symbolic cultivation, a libation jar for pouring sacred water back into the earth. Perhaps he stood beside priests, who read the movement of constellations, seeking omens, tracing divine approval in the wheeling sky. Sopdet, the star we know as Sirius, was the herald of the Nile flood, its rising in the sky marking the new year. To the ancients, this was not coincidence. It was destiny unfolding in light. To align ceremony with stars was to anchor the human in the cosmic, to draw power not from might, but from harmony. And Scorpion, it seems, understood this. His presence is found not in war relics, but in objects of ritual. Ivory, stone, symbol-laden fragments meant for sacred acts. His was a kingship tied to rhythm, to the seasons of soil, to the whispers of the heavens. As the people gathered around glowing fires, as the stars wheeled slowly overhead, they would have seen him not as a god, but as a listener of gods, a dreamer made flesh. And in those quiet nights, beneath the endless choir of stars, the first shape of sacred kingship took form. A form without walls, without wealth, only presence, only alignment, a man beneath the stars, carving meaning into darkness, still watching, becoming. There are no records written in ink from Scorpion's time, no scrolls to detail his thoughts, no hymns transcribed to honor his deeds. But there is a scent, faint, elusive, sacred, that drifts through the remnants of his age. The scent of incense, resin from desert trees, harvested with reverence, mixed with myrrh, burned in shallow clay vessels. Its smoke rose in thin blue streams, curling like spirits into the sky, not merely to perfume the air, but to carry prayers, to awaken the unseen. Incense was not luxury, it was invocation. It marked the threshold between the ordinary and the sacred, between waking and dreaming. When the king entered ritual space, incense burned. When offerings were placed before unseen gods, incense accompanied them. When the ancestors were remembered, it was with the breath of shadow and scent. In the Predynastic tombs, we find traces of this devotion, fragments of incense burners, residues of fragrant gums once mixed with oil, ashes undisturbed for millennia. And though the smoke has long since vanished, the silence it filled still lingers. Scorpion, whose symbols are etched not in gold, but in bone and shard, surely moved within these fragrant shadows. Perhaps he stood before a shrine of uncarved stone, hands outstretched, face bathed in rising vapor. Perhaps he uttered no words at all, for silence was the language of the sacred. In this rising smoke, boundary dissolved. Man and God, dust and eternity, flesh and dream, all became one breath. The scent of incense marked more than ceremony. It marked intention. It told the world, here we remember, here we ask, here we wait for answer. And in the age of Scorpion, before papyrus, before pyramids, before prayers were recorded, there was only this, a bowl of glowing ember, a curl of scented shadow, a king standing still, listening, breathing, becoming the bridge between earth and what lies beyond. Even now, thousands of years later, that scent haunts the ruins, not in aroma, but in memory. A memory of reverence, of silence turned holy, a time when a single wisp of smoke carried all the weight of a kingdom's soul, and Scorpion stood within it, still a stone, alive with spirit. In the earliest days of Egypt's dreaming, before pharaohs bore crowns of lapis and linen, before hieroglyphs etched prayers into the skin of temples, there was a tool both mundane and mystical, the cosmetic palette, flat, carved from slate or schist. These palettes were used for grinding pigment, for crafting the dark coal that would adorn eyes and protect against the sun's harsh light. But these were not mere mirrors of vanity. They were vessels of vision, of ritual, of divine sight. The eye in ancient Egypt was sacred, a symbol not only of seeing, but of knowing. To line the eyes in black was not decoration, but invocation, a way to channel the watchfulness of gods, a way to guard against unseen forces that slip between daylight and dream. And so the palette became sacred. Some were plain, used in daily life, but others were carved with care, with animals, standards, symbols. They were offerings, they were spells, they were memory. In Scorpion's time, these palettes were not yet inscribed with lines of poetry, but they held power nonetheless. Perhaps one lay in his hand, cool and weighty, etched with the form of a lion or a falcon. Perhaps he ground pigment into dust, mixed it with oil, anointed his own eyes before stepping into ceremony. To see clearly was a divine act. To perceive was to rule. And the dark-lined eye, what would become the eye of Horus, was a promise. That vision was not simply outward, but inward and sacred. Later the Nama palette would rise, a grand artifact bearing scenes of unification, of kingship cast in stone. But before there was only the subtle slate, and perhaps in one of these humble tools, the Scorpion King's presence lingers, his symbol, perhaps etched faintly beside an animal form, not declaring, only suggesting he needed no monument, only the sacred tools of daily life, lifted into ritual by presence. And the divine eye, lined, shaded, open, saw not just enemies, not just offerings, but eternity, dream, truth. Scorpion, in his silence, may have seen all this, not with grandeur, but with stillness. The palette was his mirror, not of self, but of soul. The desert holds memory differently, not in ink or in stone alone, but in wind, in shifting dunes, in the long hush between moments. Here, legacy is not carved, it is buried, preserved in fragments, in broken ivory tags, in pottery glazed with dust. Scorpion's name, or what we think was his name, is not preserved in hymns or royal decrees. No statues bear his likeness, no temple sings his praise, and yet he remains, whispered through symbols, carried on the lips of archaeologists like a breath returned from the ancient wind. His legacy is not straightforward, it is not linear, it is scattered, like desert seeds, waiting for rain. In the tombs at Abydos, his possible resting place lies in shadow. In museums, his symbols rest under glass, silent but unforgotten. But more than this, his presence lives in what came after, in the very idea of kingship, in the silent rituals that shaped Egypt before Egypt knew itself. Without Scorpion, there might be no pharaohs, no unification, no divine order stretching from Memphis to Thebes. He is the breath before the word, the ripple before the flood, the pause before the hymn. His was a reign not marked by scale, but by essence. He planted the roots that others would later water, and though the tree would grow tall, with gold and song and stone, its seed was quiet, hidden, sacred. The sand does not proclaim, it preserves, it watches, it waits, and sometimes it whispers. It whispers of Scorpion, of the king who came before kings, who wore a creature as a crown, who ruled not in echo, but in origin. His legacy is not in what we know, it is in what we wonder, and that is the truest legacy of all. Not all memory is spoken, not all remembrance is loud. Sometimes, the truest echoes are those that whisper not in voice, but in presence. Scorpion's age is one of shadows, of partial truths and broken signs, of mystery that clings not from confusion, but from sacred quiet. And in this silence, there is power. Modern minds often chase answers, names, dates, lines of certainty drawn in ink. But Scorpion belongs to a different order. He is not a page in a textbook, he is a breath in the wind, a suggestion in the sand. To remember him is not to recite, it is to feel, to stand beneath the Egyptian sky as dusk deepens over the river, to walk through ruins where no inscription survives but the shape of presence lingers, to touch a shard of ivory and know, someone once carved this, someone who dreamed, who ruled, who listened. Silence is not absent, it is reverence. Scorpion's memory persists, not because it was shouted, but because it was sacred, like a shadow cast by firelight, changing, yet rooted, fleeting, yet true. In the quiet halls of museums, in the pages of cautious archaeology, his image returns, not as a figure fully known, but as one glimpsed. And in that glimpse, we remember something older than knowledge. We remember the importance of mystery, of pausing before certainty, of honoring what cannot be fully seen. Scorpion teaches us this, that history is not only what we know, it is what we approach and what we sit beside in stillness, what we do not disturb. His silence is not emptiness, it is presence, held gently, watched eternally by stars that still turn above the Nile. And so, we listen not for answers, but for memory, for the kind that lives beyond language, for the kind that endures in stillness, for the kind that waits in silence, like Scorpion, still unseen, still remembered, still whispering. Close your eyes and let the sand settle, let the Nile quiet, let the stars gather in silence overhead. Now, imagine the very first king, not a man clad in gold, but one wrapped in linen and dusk, not perched upon a throne of polished stone, but seated upon the earth itself, listening. His crown is simple, his gaze unblinking, his voice seldom used. He watches the herons fly low over the reeds. He touches the water at morning with bare hands. He knows the name of each hill, the language of each wind. He is not legend. He is not God. He is Dream Scorpion, the first dream of kingship, the unspoken ideal, the shape that power took when it was still humble, still sacred. He does not build monuments. He builds understanding. He does not command the world. He walks in rhythm with it. And in doing so, he leaves behind more than temples or tombs. He leaves a model, a way of being. The early Egyptians saw their ruler not just as a leader, but as a vessel of order, of balance, of that great concept that held the world together. Truth, justice, harmony. Scorpion lived before the word was named, but perhaps he felt it, lived it, dreamed it into motion. He is not the first pharaoh. He is the first imagining, the prototype, the threshold, and that is why he lingers. Why, even now, his presence can be felt in the brush of wind over desert stone, in the curve of a ceremonial hoe on a mace head, in the faint scorpion glyph carved into ivory. He does not need a statue. He does not need a temple. He lives in the dream itself, the dream of what a king might be. Not just a ruler, but a listener. Not just a builder, but a guardian. Not just a man of might, but a man of meaning. Scorpion is that dream. And each time we wonder about him, each time we close our eyes and see the desert through his gaze, we continue that dream. We carry it forward, like the flood, like the wind, like the stars. Still dreaming, still drifting, still returning. The desert forgets quickly. Wind carries away footprints. Time smooths the scars of passage. And yet, some footsteps remain, not beneath the surface but within the silence. Scorpion's feet once touched the same earth that tourists now tread in wonder, that archaeologists sift with reverent hands. But his path is invisible, not because it is gone, but because it was never meant to be seen. It was meant to be felt. There are no carved roads bearing his name, no procession routes lined with statues. Only dust, only memory, only the faint press of presence. It is said that kings walk heavily, but Scorpion did not. He walked lightly. He passed like a breeze between seasons, known to those who listened, but missed by those who sought spectacle. His journey was not to claim, but to align. Each village he passed, each riverbend he watched, each ceremony he joined, he left something behind, a sense, a tone, a balance. And though time has buried the details, the rhythm remains, like a song whose melody lives even when the lyrics are lost. We see his path not in stone but in continuity, in the rituals that followed, in the crowns that rose, in the order that held Egypt's heart for millennia. He was not a builder of empires, he was a founder of feeling. And so, his footsteps persist not on the surface, but below it, in the breath of temples, in the silence of tombs, in the gaze of the falcon as it wheels above the sand. Even now, as we speak his name in wonder, we walk beside those steps, invisible, intimate, sacred. The footsteps in the dust will not lead us to his body, but they lead us to his spirit, a presence that outlives evidence, a whisper that defies time. Scorpion walked here, not as a conqueror but as a beginning, and the dust remembers. It always remembers. In the long corridor of Egyptian history, where names are chiseled deep into stone Khufu, Ram says there is one name that was never fully carved. Scorpion, or perhaps he had another name, one that has crumbled away or never found its script. His emblem appears etched delicately on fragments. A curled tail, a segmented form, a symbol more than a sound. He lives not in the syllables we recite, but in the signs we study. The ancients believed that to name something was to grant it life. To speak a name aloud was to call a soul into presence. But Scorpion's name is silent, not lost, but hidden, not erased, but veiled. There is power in this. To bear an uncarved name is to belong to the realm of myth, to step beyond certainty into something older, more sacred. Perhaps this was by design. Perhaps his people knew that the man who stood at the edge of time did not need a name written in ink or a stone. His presence was his name, his vision, his voice. The early scribes may have known it, a breath too soft to record, a glyph too sacred to repeat. And yet he endures, not in catalogues of kings, not in king lists or annals, but in the heart of history, in its beginnings, where language trembled into being. He stood. Where order dreamed of its first shape, he watched. He is not defined by a name, he is the pause before naming, the breath before birth, and that makes him eternal. For every time we ask, who was he? Every time we lean closer to the symbol, to the carved tale, to the echo, we name him anew, not in one word, but in wonder. The uncarved name lives, where memory touches mystery, where silence touches story. Scorpion, never fully named, never fully forgotten. Every civilization begins at a doorway, a moment when myth meets memory, when wandering becomes belonging, when presence steps out from shadow and declares itself sacred. This threshold is not marked by gold. It is not crossed with triumph. It is quiet, subtle, invisible to most. But it is here that history begins. And Scorpion stood upon that first threshold. He was not a pharaoh in the way we imagine, surrounded by columns, enshrined in cartouches lifted by legacy. He was a figure emerging from earth and silence, with one foot in the realm of the forgotten, and one in the realm of the eternal. The threshold he crossed was not only temporal, it was spiritual, from scattered tribes to gathering order, from symbols into systems, from whispers into rhythm. He may not have ruled a united Egypt, but he ruled a world coming into shape, a place where ritual found its roots, where kingship took breath, where the sacred found form. And that threshold, that first unsteady crossing, was the most important of all, because it was the beginning. All that came after, the pyramids, the dynasties, the temples and tombs, the names carved into forever, was built on what he began. He did not build monuments, he built direction. He did not light torches, he struck the first spark. To stand on the first threshold is to know both past and future, to carry what has been and dream of what might be. It is a place of tension, of silence filled with meaning. Scorpion dwelled there, a sovereign of stillness, a guardian of what would come. And though his crown was simple, and his name half lost, he was the first, the one who walked forward, so that all others might follow. He did not shout, He did not carve his path, he became the path, the first threshold, still waiting, still sacred, still whispering beneath the sand. Not all rulers proclaim themselves with trumpets, not all kings leave behind walls engraved with triumph. Some dream quietly, and in their silence, they shape eternity. Scorpion was such a king. He did not carve his story in the manner of later pharaohs. He did not raise pyramids, nor construct mighty obelisks to point toward heaven, but he dreamed. And his dream was vast. He envisioned a people woven together, a land ruled not by fear, but by flow, by balance, by rhythm. He saw the Nile not as a boundary, but as a bridge. He saw symbols not as decorations, but as seeds of language. He saw the scorpion, a creature feared and respected, not as a threat, but as a sign of stillness, of knowing when to act and when to remain unseen. Perhaps he stood alone in the desert, beneath the veil of stars, watching the winds whisper through the dunes. Perhaps he prayed without voice, his thoughts rising like smoke toward gods who had no temples yet. To dream in silence is not to be forgotten. It is to create from within. The greatest truths are not shouted, they are felt. Scorpion's rule was not built on conquest. It was built on presence. He did not need to announce himself. The land knew him, the people followed. The river flowed in harmony with his pace. He was a sovereign of stillness, a weaver of invisible threads. And in that stillness, he began a story that would echo through millennia. A story of kingship, of sacred order, of balance between heaven and earth, before anyone else dared to. And he dreamed it not with ambition, but with reverence. Not with pride, but with that a man might serve something greater, might listen more than he speaks, might walk as quietly as the stars turn. Scorpion dreamed in silence, and that silence shaped the world. Even now, it hums beneath the desert. It breathes in the temples of later kings. It lives in every crown, every offering, every word spoken in awe of the ancient. He was the first king not because he ruled, but because he dreamed. And he did so, without a single sound. The desert forgets nothing. It may seem barren. Its dunes may shift. Its winds may erase every footprint by dawn. But beneath that ever-changing surface, memory settles like dust in the corners of silence. What the desert remembers, it does not speak aloud. It holds it quietly, patiently, for those who choose to listen. Scorpion's name is not shouted by the stones. No great statue bears his likeness. No inscription pleads for remembrance. And yet, the desert remembers him, in the shape of the land where he walked, in the curve of the tools he once held, in the lingering fragrance of incense once lit under a star-soaked sky. When archaeologists unearthed his artifacts, they found not gold, but meaning, jars from distant lands, marked with tags, symbols of order, of exchange, of care. This was not the legacy of a tyrant. It was the legacy of someone who understood connection. The desert keeps that memory. It keeps it in the fragments. A scorpion glyph on an ivory tag, a ceremonial mace head buried beneath the centuries. It keeps it in the silence, the kind of silence that holds the breath of the sacred. And when the wind moves just right, when the sun dips behind a sandstone ridge, you can feel it. Not a voice, not a presence, but a knowing. A sense that someone once stood here with great stillness and saw the world as whole. The desert remembers Scorpion not because he demanded it, but because he earned it. He walked without noise, without spectacle. He ruled not by imprinting himself on the land, but by moving in harmony with it. And in return, the land remembered him. Not in permanence, but in essence. The memory of Scorpion is not carved, it is carried. By wind, by grain, by dream, by the desert, which remembers all things that moved with purpose and passed without disturbing the stars. Every crown casts a shadow, even the earliest ones. Simple white cones of woven reeds or painted leather carried weight far greater than gold. To wear a crown in ancient Egypt was not to claim dominion. It was to assume burden, to become visible not only to people, but to gods. The Scorpion King, that first quiet sovereign, knew this. We see him crowned on the ceremonial mace head standing tall, wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt. No throne beneath him, no wall behind him. Only earth, only sky. And the crown, it rests upon his brow, not like a jewel, but like a promise, a responsibility, to guide the people, to honor the river, to keep balance between heaven and soil. But beneath that crown, a shadow, not of failure, nor of pride, but of depth. For every king who dreams in silence knows that kingship is not only light, it is also a mystery. To lead is to enter a place where the world expects vision, but the path is still being carved. To wear the crown is to face the unknown on behalf of the many. The shadow beneath the crown is the fear of imbalance, the ever-present risk of forgetting the sacred rhythm, of letting order slip into control, harmony into hierarchy. Scorpion stood at the very beginning of this tension. There were no examples before him, no maps, only stars, only the river, only the weight of his own listening. And he chose stillness. He chose a crown not to dominate, but to align. His shadow then was not cast by ego. It was the shadow of awe, of reverence. He knew what it meant to stand between two worlds, mortal and divine, dust and dream. That no one gave him quiet strength, and that strength became the seed from which pharaohs would one day rise. They would bear heavier crowns, they would carve names larger than mountains, but beneath them all, his shadow remained the first, the quietest, the most enduring. The shadow beneath the crown is not to be feared, it is to be honored, for it is there that wisdom begins. And Scorpion was crowned in silence. History, as we often receive it, starts with noise, with victories recorded, with names repeated, with monuments proclaiming the rise of dynasties. But before that noise, there was quiet, a forgotten beginning. No records etched in granite, no proclamations carved in hieroglyphs, only fragments, symbols, silence. And within that silence a man stood, Scorpion. He was not forgotten because he was unimportant. He was forgotten because he belonged to the twilight, the borderlands between myth and memory, between what was imagined and what became form. His story is not erased. It was never fully written. He existed in the gestures and the offering of wine from foreign lands, in the standard raised above a gathered people, in the marking of goods with signs of order. He was there when Egypt took its first breath as one, not unified by force, but drawn together by rhythm, by reverence, by vision. His rule left no vast legacy of conquest, but it left something subtler, a tone, a cadence, a model for what power could mean when wielded with stillness. The forgotten beginning is not a place of weakness. It is a place of becoming. It is the moment just before the drumbeat starts, the breath before the hymn, the hush before sunrise. Scorpion lived in that hush. He walked among his people not with fanfare but with attention. He listened to the land. He listened to the stars. He listened to the unspoken longing of a people not yet called a nation. And in listening, he led. The forgotten beginning is not lost. It is waiting, waiting for those who seek not noise, but nuance, not answers, but wonder, not glory, but grace. Scorpion is still there, in the wind between dunes, in the curve of the Nile as it flows toward memory, in the way silence sometimes says more than speech. We do not begin with monuments, we begin with mystery, and Scorpion was the first to dream it into motion. All stories, even those without endings, drift eventually beneath a veil of time, not to vanish, but to rest, to become something else, a whisper, a symbol. Scorpion lies there now, not in a tomb we can name with certainty, nor in a shrine polished by reverent hands, but beneath that final veil where memory slips into myth, and myth circles gently into eternity. We do not know the place of his burial. We do not know the sound of his voice. We do not know the name he spoke when he dreamed alone, but we know he was there, in the shaping of order, in the breath of ceremony, in the rhythm that first dared to call itself Egypt. He is not gone. He is woven into the floodwaters' rise, into the reeds' slow dance at dusk, into the echo of sandals pressing into warm clay long ago. Beneath time's veil, he watches, not with eyes, but with presence, not with power, but with peace. And that is the mystery, that the first to dream kingship left so little, and yet shaped so much. Perhaps that is the deeper wisdom, to pass through history not as thunder, but as breath, to build not empires, but alignment, not dominion, but memory. Scorpion rests beneath that sacred hush, a hush too deep for excavation, too ancient for translation. And yet, we feel him in the symbols we still trace, in the stars we still follow, in the question that remains even after the answer is past. Who was the first to dream of a kingdom? The answer lies not in stone, but in silence, not in the crown, but in the one who wore it, as if it were the desert wind. Scorpion, king before kings, voice before language, presence before permanence. Beneath time's final veil, he sleeps, and dreams are still. And now, dear dreamer, our journey draws to its end. We have walked the breathless sands, stood beneath forgotten stars, and listened for footsteps where none remain but echoes. We have not found Scorpion in the pages of history, for he does not live there. He dwells deeper, in the folds of shadowed memory, in the first stirrings of vision, in the sacred stillness before the world learned how to name its kings. Tonight, we have not chased glory, we have followed mystery. We have honored the beginning not with noise, but with reverence. And as you drift now into sleep, into silence, into the soft dark beyond the veil of time, know that his story does not end. It lingers like incense in the evening, like a star in the corner of your eye, like the hush that falls over the desert just before dawn. Thank you for wandering here with me, along the quiet Nile, among the sacred sands. May the dream of Scorpion carry you gently into the next realm. If the whispers of ancient kings bring peace to your soul, leave behind a soft echo, a gentle like, and join our circle of silent seekers by subscribing to this nightly temple of memory. Let us know, dear listener, from which corner of the world you joined us, that together, across time zones and oceans, we may form a constellation, a dreaming people. bound not by borders, but by wonder. Until our next journey, rest in stillness. Let the veil of time draw close, and sleep, knowing that the first king still dreams with you. Good night, traveler of forgotten worlds. Good night, keeper of ancient echoes. May your dreams be deep, and your memory eternal.